Welcome to Talking Tuesday. I am your host, Fancy Quant, and today we have Dan from AI4. Welcome to the podcast, Dan.
Thank you so much for having me, Dimitri.
So why don't you give us a quick introduction of who you are and who you work for?
Sure thing. So as Dimitri said, I'm Dan Lackland. I am the content lead for AI4. We are an event organizer and digital media company that focuses mostly on AI, but also some other technologies and a few other related industries too. And like I said, I'm the content lead. So my job is mostly to put together, agendas and other types of learning materials for our audience.
Okay, awesome. So the reason I'm having you on, so people know here, is I actually was one of the hosts and presenters on an AI4 presentation. So you guys actually do YouTube content as well that's free, or at least you've been doing it. Do you mind talking a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So we have, these live webinars and events. And obviously we were super pumped to have you on, Dimitri. And then what we typically just record everything kind of like, in a podcast or whatever. And then we just upload it to YouTube. And we've been doing that, even since before the pandemic began. Back when we were doing live events, we would always record all the talks and put them on YouTube. We just find that it's a nice way to, to continue to get people interested when there's a lull in our event schedule.
Okay. And what's the main goal of AI4 here? So I know you guys do a bunch of conferences, which are paid, and then you guys have the free YouTube stuff. Like, what's the direction kind of the company here and the goal that you guys are pushing for?
Yeah. So AI4, like I said, we're events and media. We really were events for a long time since we began. Since the pandemic began, we're doing a little more like other media-oriented products. But the goal is to create a peer-to-peer learning environment that centers around AI and its applications for industry. And so we put together these events with the goal being to have experts, kind of like you are with some of your work, but all different types, all different industries, come on and talk about, cool AI use cases for their organizations, for their startups, whatever they're working on. And the reason we're doing this is because AI is growing, it's really engaging, and people want to know. And there's a lot of confusion and obscurity, I think, surrounding it. So that's kind of why we do what we do. And then I should add that we also, in addition to focusing on these AI-driven content creation type things, we also do AI trainings, which is a pretty new service we're providing, where we can basically, teach some people data science if they want to learn more. And then we've also began to enter into a totally new community, which is real estate technology. So we're sort of replicating I know, right?
Yeah, something different. I've never seen this.
Yeah. So we're sort of replicating the model of like, okay, people want to learn about the latest and greatest, technology use cases. So we're sort of making a foray into real estate technology as well.
Okay. So is that still baked on the AI side, or are you guys looking at technology in general for real estate?
It's really it's the latter. It's technology and real estate across the board. I think we might have an AI focus within that because, we, are still through and through AI fans, but yeah, it's totally new for us. We actually have an event coming up in December, which is the real estate technology. So it's really quite exciting.
So what does it focus on? I mean, what's the software here? Is it like applications for listings, or is it getting new clients, or how does?
I think it's really broad and interesting. So I'm actually not the content lead producing the content there.
Okay.
So I'm not as well versed in exactly what all the different tracks will be and who the speakers will be. But I can tell you that, our guy who's leading it, this guy, James Sheeran, he's been in the real estate event technology world for a long time. And he's really excited. He thinks that there's a ton of, emerging technologies that are really exciting. So I'm really excited to go to the event and honestly learn for myself a little bit more.
Yeah. So for people that don't know, I'll put a link below to some of your guys' videos. Cool. So we had the one event I was on, which was just finance, which it's awesome. It's finance. But I was more interested in some of the other, like there was I think like a text version, like how the computer looks at the text and how it reads it through using AI. And then you guys brought in people from different tech firms and industries so they could sit and talk about it. So I think it's always helpful kind of looking at those and hearing kind of what basically everyone always tells me. They say, hey, Dimitri, where are these other quants? Where are these other data scientists? No one's talking about it. But I like your guys' stuff because I go on and find you like that obscure guy who's coding in the background at Google or something, and you bring him on to some sort of a podcast and you have people chatting about, kind of the technologies and what they're doing.
Oh yeah, it's so fun. Yeah, I mean, the technical talks especially too. I mean, just to your point, I mean, we'll have digital events that are with content that's really for a business audience, and the focus is on, these are some cool use cases. This is how it's affecting the bottom line. This is what you can do. And then we don't really dive into the technical details, but some of our content is all about, natural language processing and all the latest innovations there. Or I know you've done some work on time series, right? In finance, like here is Joe Schmo, who just is Mr. Time Series, So yeah, it varies super widely. You're totally right.
Yeah. So how do you guys find these people? Because you guys have done a good job, I think, at pulling out, like you're saying, right, that expert that's kind of hidden away in a corporation. And I always hate seeing like the executive comes on and, I'm the senior director of, data science or, finance. And it's like, it's great, but you're not giving us that nitty gritty detail. But how do you find those guys?
The technical people you're referring to? Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, so, sometimes we'll manually research and find, the organizations and, the center of excellence or the group within that organization that is leading the charge on whatever initiative in data science we're interested in. And then from there, it's just a matter of, finding an email and reaching out. Other times, we can be a little less precise and just through our network or through other methods, cast a wider net and find people who have expertise in certain areas. But it can be a challenge. I mean, it's an ongoing challenge. And, one thing you also have to think about is we do so many of these events and we're doing more now that it's all digital. We're doing, increased frequency because, a bunch of different reasons, but, people are only willing to talk so many times during the year. I mean, you obviously probably have an insight into that with your podcast. And so you always have to be looking for new people, new experts. So yeah, it's a challenge and it's a fun challenge, but it can be interesting.
Yeah. And you guys have an event coming up, don't you, on the 18th?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, you're so right. Yeah, it's in 4 days.
Yeah, I got invited to it and I was like, oh, I should attend this.
You should attend it. You'll totally come. Yeah. So we have an event we're calling it What's Next in Enterprise AI. And it's sort of like our end of year capstone event where we're, looking ahead and saying, okay, across the enterprise, what are the different use cases that experts are really excited about and thinking about in AI? And, we have a special focus also this time on what's applicable cross industry. So a lot of the experts, whether they're from healthcare or finance or retail, will come on and say, this use case isn't about our core function. This is actually about building a data pipeline or enabling some other use case that's just generally applicable to any organization. So that's kind of the focus this time.
Okay. Yeah, I'm excited to go. I got the invite. I was planning on going to it, but I didn't have a lot of details on, what is going to be focusing on.
Good. I'm glad you got it. Yeah. It'd be pretty embarrassing if something went wrong. Yeah. Good to know. Yeah. If you can come to all the events if you want. I mean, just FYI.
Yeah. No, they're fun. I really enjoy them because I always get my perspective. And then like I said, I'm so layered down inside the banking industry. I never see the tech world. So I have to make an effort to go find someone, or like a buddy of mine works at Domino's Pizza and I have to message him and say, hey, you guys are doing, data science, machine learning over there. What type of models are you using? How is it working? What's the technology? And people always act shocked, like a pizza company's using, data science and AI techniques. I'm like, yeah, they've got a ton of really cool use cases, but again, it's nothing applicable to finance, but they're trying to see kind of that overlap between the two.
100%. Do you mind if I ask you a question on that?
Yeah.
So so correct me if I'm wrong. You're kind of someone who is in a way, and you might correct me, kind of leading the charge on, AI use in risk management in your workplace. Is that right? Is that how you would say that?
Yeah. That's how we'd say it.
Okay. So, as someone who is, very skilled in a technical way, I mean, do you find that you can draw inspiration from, other people who are doing neat things like in other industries?
I do. So I find it really odd that people want to go out and find like a specific book on like AI in finance. Because I'm like, it's a tool. Like you can apply the tool across the board. I'll give you an example. So some industries use fraud models for like credit card transactions. So like they sell some product, they want to flag the customer and say, hey, it's a false charge. We don't want to sell them goods and services. Banking has the exact same model on the other end of it. And we have the account and we're looking for the fraud on our end. So you could essentially be using almost the same sort of model in two different industries. So I see a lot of crossovers. I don't see a lot of differences, to be honest. Like obviously when you build like I don't know, something specific for like credit risk, it's going to be very specific, but all the tools, all the methodologies, the processes will all be, I think, identical across the board. But I think the hardest part for us is getting that senior management on board of what we're doing here. Because when you work at Google or Facebook and you say, hey, we're going to use, I don't know, a neural network and we're going to predict out, I don't know, default losses for credit portfolio, people start saying, hey, that's a black box. We don't want to touch it. But when you do that in a finance or a tech company or somewhere else, they're like, oh, let's do it. Let's get our hands dirty. Let's do some experimentation and research. So I think from our side, it's more of how do you overcome the hurdles with management and how do you get like the whole kind of bank and everyone behind you? Because you still need, the data pipeline. You still need all the IT staff to kind of like pitch in and get the whole thing moving. So I do see a lot of crossovers, but it's always a challenge, I think, on our side because banking's so regulated and there's so much resistance, I think, to the AI kind of movement.
Man, I mean, you're not the first person to tell me that. Where do you think the resistance comes from? That's something that I've not been able to tease out, actually, and I feel confused about that, actually.
Okay, so I can tell you where the resistance comes from. So
okay, yeah.
There's a couple of points here. From a tech kind of quant side like myself, one of them is that the data science community doesn't have a solid groundings a lot of times in theory. So when we build a model for a bank, it has to have all this logic and theory baked into it. And our regulators love to see that. So I can say like, I don't know, let's say you're doing an auto loan for a customer. I can say like, if you have low income, you've defaulted on 6 loans in the last 3 months, and I don't know, you've moved addresses like 7 times or something. These are all flags of like, hey, something's off here. Maybe they're homeless, maybe they don't have a job. We probably shouldn't make them a loan. So we like to have all that baked in. One of the issues when you see the data scientists come in, they usually don't care about that. And so they'll build some model and then they'll just run it and they'll say accuracy is like 99%. And I'm like, well, that's great. But I mean, is it a legitimate model? Is it using real variables? Does it have like theory behind it? And I think they're so seeking out that accuracy, they overfit it consistently. And I've even seen people say, hey, this is a really underfitted model. It's going to perform great. And then we go back and do additional testing and it fails. So from a tech side, it's like, it's hard, for me at least, it's hard to bring in those that are AI and data science experts and say, hey, build me a model, because we're missing so much on the regulatory side. Where it's like, I want someone that really thinks about the details and the testing and trying to interpret the black box pieces behind the model. So we have a lot of struggle with that. The other piece is that I think the business half, so think like executive CEOs, finance departments, marketing departments, they're terrified that we're going to come in and just automate their job away. So yeah, so they're thinking like, we can do automation, but let's do it like on the technical side. We'll get rid of these high price quants over here. So get rid of people like me. But they don't want to get rid of like the really easy things that AI could do amazing. Like accounting, you could automate a lot of that. You have the same transaction every month. It'll go into the same ledgers. It's the same accounts. You're going to like deduct the same. It's all the same. You could automate so many systems, and yet they're hesitant. And I've actually done it once before. So I worked at a firm. They hired a guy who had a PhD, and he was data quality control. And he came in and he was responsible for downloading all this data, going into Excel and plotting out, I think it's like 330, 350 charts. And then he'd have to manually review each chart and make sure it looked okay. There's no like jumps or shifts. And I looked at it like, this is such a waste of time. Like working in Excel's kind of viewed as like a low level skill. And then, reviewing all these charts is just boring and a waste of time. So somebody brought me in and said, hey, can you help this guy do it outside of Excel and do it like in SAS? So I'm like, okay, that's no big deal. So we actually went into it and we actually automated the whole process. So it would go online, it'd go to our vendor, it'd pull the data for us, the exact time frame we wanted. Then it would go through, I developed a program that would actually automatically check the data points for growth rates between the different points to make sure there's no like significant jumps. And if there was, it would say flag it and say, hey, like we've got this deviation, needs human intervention to look at it. but then it would just plot out all these charts for you and generate the final report and say everything's okay, or like 3 variables need to be reviewed. And we'd send this to all of development, and it was done within like 10, 20 minutes. And yet the other guy was spending like 2 weeks on it. And it's like
10 or 20 minutes. Holy
yeah.
crap. Okay. Wow.
So yeah, so I think there's two folds to it. There's the business side is just fearful it's going to get rid of their jobs, which I understand. I get the fear there, but I think a lot of them miss the point that if you could automate the boring stuff in your job, you could spend more time doing like the strategy and kind of the fun idea thinking part instead of the repetitive stuff, which is what AI is great at doing. And then the quant side, I think, is trying to get a lot of the AI people up to snuff on like quantitative standards on, I mean, you have a model, but what does it mean? How do you tear it apart? And are we going to get dinged by regulators in the finance side? Because they're pretty strict on how things work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's funny, something you said also about, really having a good understanding of, I mean, you talked about, matching theory with, accuracy and that being a real focus. I mean, you also said something else, and I thought it was kind of interesting. We also will find that sometimes people who are looking at, something like a credit score or something like that. I mean, there's a lot of fear I've noticed about, being ethical in sort of the data that is being used and stuff like that too. And you didn't say explicitly that, but I mean, that seems to be a real fear as well. I don't know if you've noticed that or.
Yeah, and I think, so I saw an article on LinkedIn too, somebody posted on there that computers aren't biased, so we shouldn't worry about it. But a lot of people don't realize there's very specific things you can narrow down to other factors. So if you go back, I don't know, 10, 20 years here, everybody talks about how redlining was terrible, which is basically where you take a map and you say, okay, we're going to draw a red line around this area, and we're either going to make loans here or we're going to completely avoid it. So for example, we can't use zip code in a model. I mean, the real reason for that has to come down with, okay, well, you could bake in ethnicity, right? You circle a neighborhood. This could be a race of individuals you don't necessarily like or you don't want to make loans to, but that's not really an ethical construct of like, why would you exclude them? You might have really solid individuals that have good jobs, that have better salary than the neighbors, that might be just amazing people. And I think that's where a lot of the finance side is kind of fearful, is trying to figure out like, how do we ensure that we're not doing that? And I've been trying to show people you can actually use traditional statistical methods and you can actually build a model, price everybody on it, and then let's take those fearful variables. So if we do have, their race, or we do have age, or we have zip code or something, let's look at the model and let's break it out by those and see how they break out. So let's say you had age or something. So, I don't know, 18 to 25, 25 to 35. You could break it out in bins and see, like, we have an even distribution, or perhaps we're making a lot of loans to the older crowd, but perhaps they're safer. So then you'd have to do more analysis on breaking down, is that driven by income, or is that driven by, one of those layers in a tree, for example, or a neural network or something is actually picking up information we don't see, but it's actually using, for example, age as a discriminatory factor, or race or something like that.
Yeah. Wow, it's so complicated. I mean, what you're talking about, it makes total sense.
Yeah, it's an interesting aspect, I think, because one of the other concerns some of the banks are talking about is, what if you end up combining two variables and they actually result in a third variable that we wouldn't want?
Oh, could you say more about that? I actually don't understand what you mean.
Yeah, so I mean, imagine, so we talked about, for example, like zip code.
Yeah.
So if you live in a specific zip code, you're probably either wealthier or poorer. But if maybe there was another factor, so say we had data on, let's say, the type of car you drive. So let's say it's a specific brand, a specific make, and you combine that with zip code. That might actually predict, essentially, say, a race on the other end of it. So you could break things out. I mean, let's think about, I don't know how did this out coming off as too racist, but let's say you looked at like Lincolns and Cadillacs. Lincolns and Cadillacs are typically owned by African Americans or older Americans in general, right? They want that American-made quality car. That's what they're looking for. But if you combine that with your income, you might start separating this out, and you might end up in different bins, or you say, okay, African Americans are buying Lincolns and Cadillacs, but they mainly live in this neighborhood, where if you combine those two variables into a third neighborhood, you might end up saying, oh, these are just really old people that have that brand loyalty to American cars. And so you might end up having these two segmented pockets. Both of these are actually groups that we are concerned about in finance. So we don't want to discriminate based on race, which is obvious, but also age. We want to make sure we're not saying, okay, you're too old, we don't want to make you a car, right? You're probably on your Social Security and your retirement and whatnot. So your income is going to be low as well. So how do we determine the differences? Zip code might be part of that, and then adding income in, and then maybe the make of the car would actually create like this, essentially this non-intentional discriminatory purpose. So how do you kind of break those out? And that's, I think, what some of the banks are starting to look at and think about. Hey, how do we think about it more tactfully? Because the model doesn't know. It's just looking at it and saying, oh, low income means higher default. We all agree with that, and then perhaps other variables are kind of working their way into that model.
Yeah, I follow. That makes sense. Wow. Well, that's where the fear comes from. I mean, as we started talking about, makes total sense.
Yeah, and I don't know. I kind of concerned with the tech industry, because tech doesn't really have the regulatory rules we have. And that's starting to come more into light with the politicians are kind of pushing that, maybe tech shouldn't be pushing political materials. Maybe they shouldn't be pushing different voices and opinions, and how do you censor it? I think everyone can agree, okay, there's specific speech that, yes, while it's protected under the First Amendment, is it really appropriate? Should they be censoring it? And that's kind of balancing. I think they've had really good success on AI, just technology development, which is great. But the question is like, where are they going to have barriers? And eventually I see regulations coming in on the tech side of how do you break their models out so they're also not discriminating on marketing practices or something different like that.
Yeah, it's very confusing. It's very challenging.
Yeah.
With great power comes great responsibility, as Spider-Man once said. Is that right? Someone in a Spider-Man movie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, so talk about a little what you guys are doing, your education, your online training courses. Who is that? Who are those meant for? Who are they typically training? And like, what is the depth of material?
Yeah. So we have two core approaches with that. So we offer, if you're just, any individual who is someone who is interested in learning more about data science and artificial intelligence, we offer, you can register for a one-off course, and our head of AI training, Spencer Stebbins, will, help you to sign up for a class, and then he can teach a course. Or sometimes we'll teach. We have some partners, for example, like New York Data Science Academy, for instance, where we will basically market the course for them and then have them teach it. But we also have our head of training can teach it. So that's one approach, which is basically one individual joins a class that we have. Okay. The other thing that we do is we are offering this advisory service to big enterprises. So because it's such a complicated and nuanced process to figure out, okay, I know we want to use data science or AI. I know we want to scale up our ability to do this quickly, but how the heck do I do that? How do I measure what skills we already have? How do I figure out what skills we need to acquire? How do I find out who can teach this and get a good price? It's really, confusing. And so we'll basically offer to an enterprise, hey, this is how you can do this. We'll get, this is, and we can sort of, guide them through the process. And we're not affiliated with any one vendor with that. Or not affiliated, we're not partnered with any one vendor there. So we really try to get people the best deal. So that's kind of the two approaches we're using for it. And it's definitely, an ongoing journey. We're continuing to learn about the best way to sort of help people in that realm. Okay.
Do you guys ever target like senior management?
Yeah. So for the individual courses, we have, technical and non-technical classes. So you can, if you're just an executive or manager somewhere, you can sign up for a course that's just, what is data science, and like, how is this even used? And, we have a 6-hour course. I think it's coming up this month. It's 6 hours. It's meant to be, months of learning, basic learning compressed in like a 6-hour course, and an instructor will just guide you through, like, this is what the data science process looks like. This is what the vocabulary means. And, this is how you can think about approaching problems with these techniques. And that, that's for, a manager type person.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you guys ever target the finance industry? maybe we could get over this hurdle of, AI data science here and have you guys train some more of the, the senior staff.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure we're doing the finance industry. Yeah, I mean, yeah, if anyone, if anyone in the audience is ever interested, I mean, we're learning. I mean, we're responsive to feedback depending on what organizations need. I mean, because I think, the same reason we're offering data science training is the same reason we're offering these events, which is that, we recognize there's confusion around AI. We recognize it's important and it has the ability to really add a ton of value in a million different ways. And we want to do it responsibly and teach others how to think about it responsibly. So.
Do you guys ever struggle to get, I don't know, I guess traction in a teaching? For example, like when you teach something and then someone looks at it and they go, we're still kind of confused. We don't really understand what it was about. Do you guys try to get that? I don't know. Because I always feel like when people always ask, I mean, I'll give you an example. I went back home a few weeks ago and a buddy of mine's a lawyer. So he has no clue what we do for a living. So he starts asking questions like, well, what's a neural network? And I'm sitting here thinking like, well, it's a layering of logistic regressions or other types of activation functions. Then he looks at me and I go, it's like, did you take stats 101? He's like, no, I've never taken statistics. So it's like trying to break that down to that level for me is always challenging, even just like talking to like friends and family. And then on the banking side as well. But I just wonder if you guys have that kind of, that feedback from people. Where it's like you give an introduction course and they're like, I kind of get it, but I don't really get how the pieces are getting put together.
It's an enormous challenge. I mean, what you're describing, and we're definitely not perfect on it by any means. But I mean, I think we have Spencer. Is very knowledgeable. I think that he, really sees the whole vision of the different, depth of knowledge that people can have, which is why we're able to offer products and services like this. But it's definitely a challenge. And even if you went to our website and looked at the courses, I mean, it talks about what you should be somewhat familiar with.
Okay.
We have like a prerequisite section that says, should you take one of our other courses first? And, but it's totally hard. I mean, it feels like we're designing a college curriculum and it can be challenging. It's interesting.
Yeah. So is everything online at this point, or has it always been online for the teachings?
Yeah, so the teaching actually came into creation during the pandemic. So, when our business moved fully digital, with all our events and everything, at that time, we hadn't been offering these trainings. So yeah, everything since its inception, it's all been online. And, depending on how long, the world situation lasts, I suspect we'll be online, for a long time, maybe ever.
Okay. Yeah. See, those are always a challenge for me, is like you mentioned, right? How do you put together the curriculum? So somebody's told me like, hey, you should do a Udemy course. And I'm like, awesome, this would be a fun idea. And then I start
that'd be great.
I start writing out material. And then I'm like, but to cover this point, I'm having to go back to this other point. And so I'm like, well, maybe I should create a different course before the course. And so for me, it's hard to figure out all the pieces on, right? Like you're talking about, this is like a course, these are the prerequisites. Maybe you should go back and take another course and try to get all that layering of education in that process. So I've always been struggling with like, how do you do it? How do you set it up? So you guys are doing all your own platform now as well, right? Like it's on your own servers and website?
Yeah. Well, what do you mean exactly? Sorry. I didn't
So you're not teaching like on Udemy or anything. You guys are teaching on your own.
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
So that's always a challenge because it's nice to do it on your own because you can control everything.
Yeah.
And at least you have a staff that can man that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, And, like I said, we do partner with some, organizations that have their own thing going. So not always is it all us, but, yeah, I mean, and to your point, I mean, I think, we have this huge community of people we already know are interested in AI, and have varying, pieces of knowledge. I mean, if we didn't have an audience, it'd be very challenging, and we'd have to work very hard to get that audience. So it's a challenge. And, I mean, yeah, in terms of like, how do you figure out what people how much knowledge they have and how do you structure courses around it? I mean, it's not easy. It's definitely a challenge, but at the same time, I mean, people are really serious about it and it's clear there's a need and people are willing to, spend some money on upskilling. So There's also a lot of promise to it.
How much do you guys typically charge per course and how long is a course?
I'm not an expert. It's a few $100s for sure. It depends on the course. Okay. It depends on the course and the length of time that we offer. Yeah. Yeah. I'm actually not exactly sure. I think it depends.
Okay. I kind of looked on the website before and I was looking through the courses and I was like, it's a few $100s. And I was like, but if it's a quality course, it's definitely worth spending the time and the money to get the skills and kind of get ahead with it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So, I mean, the big struggle for me with Udemy, this is kind of where I'm stuck at, is if you create a course that's really fun and exciting, but it's really, really dumbed down so anybody can take it, you'll sell a lot of courses because anybody can take it and they'll give you 5-star reviews. But the issue is if you make them more technical and rigorous, you might have 100 people take the course and like 5 people found it amazing and they had all those prereqs and they got a lot out of it. But then I'm struggling with, do I want to make a course like that where you're getting good value? But then it's like you're getting tons of terrible reviews where people are like, it makes no sense. I don't understand, what's an activation function and where this came from. And
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think, right now with the pandemic and just, I think that maybe that's accelerating the normal course of things. But, the world of education is clearly seeing some sort of huge overhaul. I mean, in my immediate family, my younger sister is, I'm the oldest of 3 and, she's, trying to go to college soon. And, it's very unclear exactly if that's the best way for her to learn the skills she needs and, just in general. And, I mean, I think I'm really hoping that, whether it's AI4, whether it's Dimitri's Udemy course or, whatever, what have you, I'm hoping that, there's more and more options for ed tech to sort of take over the role of, people teaching people things because it's clearly an amazing option.
yeah, do you see it moving? I guess the university level is moving towards that online component more so.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I think there's going to be, it's kind of like, journalism where, I think of journalism and other content creation as like, the internet has created this meritocracy where, anyone who produces good content, you don't need a publisher, you don't need a group to sort of like be over your name. I think, some universities will do a great job in providing good educational content via the internet, but I think many will not, and some of them might disappear. And then I think other, providers like an AI4, like a Dimitri, whatever it may be, you might see more of those types of individuals who are just really good at teaching and content creation emerge.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I've been looking at it. I was always so gung ho with like brick and mortar universities. And I think there's a lot of advantages in it. But then I'm starting to look at other jobs where it's like you need the skills, but they're not super, super technical. And what you really need is just be able to absorb that information, have someone explain it to you, read the material, take a few quizzes to kind of get used to doing it. And so I can definitely see the university starting to split more so where it's like these departments are just like made for online. Even like coding. Coding is so much computer interactive that when you're online, you can watch a screen on one side and then be coding on the other side at the exact same time as a professor and really get that hands-on experience with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's wild.
But yeah, I feel bad for people like your sister though. I have students that message me and they're like, hey, should I accept this semester? Should I wait a semester? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, it could go on for another year and you don't want to waste a year of your life just kind of waiting for it, but you also want to get a good education and find a job afterwards. Like,
is your audience, so do you find that your audience, I mean, your core, I know you have a lot of people who are, entering the workforce or recently entered the workforce. Yeah. So, I mean, how are you thinking about this? Because in a way, I mean, you're, perfectly poised to at least have a really hot take on this subject. And, at most, maybe even teach people like you're talking about.
yeah, I think so. There's a bunch of factors to consider into it. So my audience is an interesting mix. Most of my audience is actually from abroad. So you'll see the views come in from the US, but what Quant Finance is like my job, I don't know, I've met like maybe 5 Americans out of the last, I say 100 to 200 people I've worked with. So all those other individuals are coming from China, India, South America, and like Europe. But like, I don't know, probably 70, 80% of those are China and India. So the struggle they have is you can't get a degree in China or India and then apply to the US and think we're going to hire you. Because in the United States, we have, thousands of graduates from all these universities across the country. And we can literally pick and choose and say, I only want someone from Columbia, or I want someone, I don't know, University of Michigan or Michigan State University, and I can hand pick who I want. There's just so many graduates. And then all these fields, or even like quantitative finance masters or data science masters, it's all these people from other countries coming to the US, getting the degree, and then graduating and then looking for jobs. So I can still pull all the top talent from China and India and Pakistan and, I don't know, France and UK and everywhere, and Brazil or something. So we can still do that. So the issue is if you did online learning, for example, let's say from Brazil, you might get the same education, but the issue now is how do we get you from Brazil to the US for an interview or for the job? And companies don't like to do it because you got to pay for all the work visas. You got to figure out, like, how do we go through the paperwork and get you here? And even if you come to the US, get an educational degree, the student visa you're on gets you a longer time frame to look for a job. And then also it still costs companies money to bring you in. And companies are willing to do it because most of us are international students, not Americans. So I think on that sense, it still makes sense to come to the US, even during a pandemic, as long as you can get the work visa piece to get here. That's crucial. But for students that are in America, it's like if you're already, I don't know, say you live in Iowa or something, and let's say you go to, I don't know, Boston University online, it's like, does it really make a difference that you're in Iowa versus Boston? Probably not, because when you're done graduating, you can easily look for jobs, in New York or Chicago or other cities. And so being in Boston wouldn't be that big of an advantage. So I see it as being online is still not viewed as good as on campus, just because there's issues with cheating online and not getting the same rigor. But I think as we move forward and we start working out more of these details, I think online will be great for domestic citizens or people that are already here. Whereas doing that abroad, you're still going to have to somehow figure out how to get to the United States to find those jobs.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Also another reason that online, continues to struggle too, in addition to, you mentioned the cheating, but, we see this in the conference space too. There's so much fun and joy, I think, that comes from, networking in person and meeting and sharing of ideas in person. And my favorite thing about, my education was, getting to know people, and it is harder over the internet. And maybe that's an obvious fact, but, I think that the internet has yet to come up with a perfect solution for that. I'm hoping that we do it. Maybe it'll be a virtual reality something, but can you imagine just virtual reality, everything? Pandemic never ends.
I never really thought about that, but the more I've been looking at my work environment, I'm realizing I don't meet people like at our bank. Where normally it's like, right, I sit in my own little cube, my own area, but it's like we sit next to like a finance department. And so like, you run to grab coffee and there's a guy there and you're like, oh, hey, I'm Dimitri, nice to meet you, where do you work? And you start chatting about, oh, you work in the finance department, and how did you get going? I didn't really realize it until you really mentioned it, where it's like, yeah, I'm not getting those interactions anymore. It's like just my, 4 or 5 people I work with, and then it's like everybody else kind of just disappears.
100%. Yeah. And actually, personally, I'm a huge proponent of making my mind engage with other people's minds who I don't know. Cause everyone always has something neat to share in my experience. That's one of the reasons I love like AI4 is because, as a content producer for these events, I talk to these interesting people who have spent a really tremendous amount of time, perfecting a certain approach to business or learning a certain skill. And, it's always a pleasurable day when I talk to these people. And that's like, honestly, my favorite part of the job. So yeah, I totally hear you. Yeah. And hopefully we can figure something out soon.
Yeah, I think that's a big key. And I think so people I've seen on LinkedIn are concerned about the promotion piece.
What do you mean? What do you mean? I don't follow.
So for promotions, it's easier when you're in the office because everybody sees you. Like I see that you're working, and it's easy for you to like bump into your boss's boss or other senior directors.
Promotions, like literally rising through ranks. I didn't get it. I thought you were talking marketing. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, no. So I think a lot of people are concerned about that. And that's another key aspect that you're talking about. It's not necessarily just the networking. It's also like having those interactions and people seeing the work you're doing. Where it's like when you're on a computer, it's like I do work and then I submit it to, my boss or the team that needs the results. But you're missing that interaction where it's like people stop you and talk to you and say, hey, what are you working on? How much productivity? Like, I don't know. There's that piece of there that you're just missing, I guess, with the online components.
They miss the Dimitri smile, the Dimitri. It's so true, honestly.
I guess some of the departments are probably glad. We have a department that sits next to us. So every bank I've been at, I always get some complaints. My voice carries. And if I'm not working, I always find someone to chat with, because it's like, I look around and I see like, oh, you know, that guy's busy, that girl's busy. And it's like, oh, that person over there, they work in, I don't know, governance or something. I'll go see how their day's going. And the people always complain, they're like, Dimitri, you're so loud. We can hear you down the hall. Can you get back to work? And I'm like, well, I don't have too much to work on today. And they didn't have much to work on today. So I'm like, all right, we'll go get coffee somewhere else instead of
Is 100%. Well, it's a sign of an enthusiastic person, I think, that your voice carries. I get the same feedback though from people. So yeah, I often have to tone it down. I know how you feel for sure.
Oh, but yeah, I don't know. I just see the education piece is so challenging.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's the big hurdle in AI in general. There's a lot of great techniques out there. A lot of people need to apply it to something new or different. Like you were mentioning before, right? How do you apply, you know, something in tech, for example, or healthcare to finance? And how do we share that technology between the firms? I think that's going to come back to the education piece and also the networking piece, where it's like, if I go to a convention and I speak on finance and you happen to be sitting there in healthcare and you're like, hey, I've never thought about doing it that way. And then you kind of get that interaction. I think that's the piece we need. And I think that's why I've been so excited when you guys contacted me with the first conference I spoke at. Was like, it's great because I can see these people from other banks. And then also it's going onto YouTube so that people can look at it and say, hey, you know, these are different industries, different people, but it sounds like they're doing similar things.
Yeah.
And we can kind of work together on different groupings for that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, geez. I mean, talking about collaboration and group learning. I mean, look at, you know, the attempt at, you know, the COVID vaccine, you know, teamwork that we've seen in the world. I mean, it's clear when people put their minds together, amazing things can happen. So yeah, I agree. I mean, if in all technology, AI included, data science included, we were able to do stuff like that, I mean, you share knowledge, it would be amazing. I totally agree.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about your annual expo? Because I've seen the ads, I've seen the marketing, and then I had a bunch of things. I've seen a bunch of stuff come up where it's like, I was going to go last year and then I just didn't get around to it. This year, obviously it was all virtual, but didn't you guys have an in-person one? I think the year before, didn't you?
Yeah. So yeah, definitely. So in 2019, we had, we basically had an in-person conference that was industry specific for each industry that we served. And then the innovation in 2020 was, we said, you know, let's put these together and create a big cross-industry event. And that was scheduled to be this was going to be last August. It was scheduled to be at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. Right. You know, we had the whole thing done, deal. It's going to be amazing. And then, you know, with the pandemic, you know, we shifted virtual, and you know, we were able to have a good experience despite that last minute shift. You know, and I think it was still like a really good time. But, you know, the whole point of the annual expo is that, you know, whereas a lot of our webinars and industry specific content will take a little bit of a deeper dive as an event into one, you know, a bunch of different use cases for finance or healthcare or something like that. The cross-industry event is exactly what we're describing, which is an opportunity for technical people to learn from other technical people across different industries. It's an opportunity for, you know, a banker to go check out a marketing and personalization talk from, you know, a leader at Amazon or Wayfair or something like that, and to say, you know, to create that cross-industry collaboration, which we think is very important.
Okay. I gotcha. So you guys are you planning next year's to be, I'm guessing, virtual at this point?
Yeah. So it's going to be in August again, which will be a year from August. And it's going to be cross industry, very similar. We're adding some new industries, which is cool. You know, which is always exciting. It's always exciting to make a foray into how AI is being used in different ones. And yeah, the way it's broken down is we'll have, you know, business content, which will have finance, retail, supply chain, healthcare, you know, oil and energy, automotive, you know, stuff like that. And then we'll also have technical content, and that's going to be broken into, you know, model types. So for example, computer vision, NLP, time series, predictive analytics, all these different, you know, approaches and stuff like that. Okay. And we'll have speakers from different industries give presentations within the technical tracks, not necessarily ordered by that industry, but like I said, ordered by model type.
Okay. I think that would be super helpful, because we always know like our problem, like we're using, I don't know, categorization models, but it'd be nice to see like other people applying that, but then being able to say, yeah, it definitely is going to apply to me in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, we would, I mean, you're the exact audience member, that would be amazing to have, because you have your own really knowledgeable perspective, but you're interested in learning about other approaches, which is the whole point. So yeah, we're really excited about August. I mean, we're doing all these events before then. You know, we have a ton of, like, for example, you know, for your people anyone who might be listening who's in finance, you know, in March 3rd and 4th, you know, we have AI for Finance Summit event. But then finance will also be represented at the, you know, end of year August cross industry event.
Okay. Okay. Do you guys know what specifically you're looking for the finance event in March? Do you have any specific, I guess, topics that you're like wanting to talk about, or are you just looking for people to pitch new ideas in general?
You know, so we always develop the agenda pretty far ahead of time. For this finance event in March, you know, we're beginning to pick out the speakers for it. And, you know, it's not super different from, you know, our traditional finance approach. I mean, we're going to look for people who are, you know, working on AI when it comes to risk. We're going to look at it when it comes to, you know, marketing and customer engagement, chatbots, et cetera. Mm-hmm. We're going to look at the asset management industry, and some topics there might be, you know, algorithmic trading or alternative data sets, stuff like that. We will look at credit and lending, you know, which, you know, and look at some use cases there. So, you know, not too different from, you know, in the past, but, you know, we're always trying to find people who, you know, haven't shared before and who might have a unique perspective to offer. Okay.
And you guys are doing both presentations from individuals as well as panel discussions, right?
That's right. Yeah, we have panels, 50 minutes, typically 50. And then the presentations, which are usually 20 or 25 minutes.
Wow, that's short.
They're always short. Yeah, people are always surprised. But, you know, the value of that is audience members, people sometimes can lose interest, especially if you have someone who's, you know, giving you a technical presentation. We find short and sweet typically works the best.
Okay. Yeah, I got invited to do a presentation for another conference. I planned it all out and I had like an hour presentation. And it was like 2 weeks before I started messaging them and they go, you got 30 minutes. And so I'm taking this hour presentation and trying to figure out how do we squish this down to a 30-minute, like, quick conversation, just get all, like you said, right, get to those really just good points so people feel like they got a good takeaway without wasting too much time.
Was it a technical presentation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, that can be really hard.
Yeah, it was rough. It was, because it goes back to that education piece of how do you put so much information layered up so that people are all on the same page before you get to like the more technical things. And then, yeah, it was a challenge. Okay. So that's good to know. 20, 25 minutes is what these presentations would be.
I guess. I mean, you know, it's funny. Actually, the event in 4 days, we have 2 people who are giving a little bit longer talks, but it's definitely not the norm. I don't know though. Maybe, you know, through your guidance, we're going to learn that longer talks are actually better, you know?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I think if you can get enough meat into a presentation in a short period of time, it's good. But I feel like a lot of times it's so hard on the technical side of how do you get enough people up to speed to do it? Because I assume everyone's on the same page sometimes, and I hit those 20, 25-minute presentations. And then afterwards, I have people that email me and they're like, hey, I didn't understand what you were talking about. Could you send me a longer presentation? So you have to send them like the PowerPoints and link them to all these YouTube videos and textbooks and whatnot. But
oh my God, what an annoying, yeah, like, hey, that was great, but I honestly just missed a lot of that. Can you please give me more detail?
Yeah, send me the longer version. Can you re-record this on YouTube for us? Thanks.
Yeah, please. So funny.
Oh. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm hoping to attend more of your guys' conferences and events. Like I mentioned, I like the interaction because I don't interact a lot of times outside of our bank because banks are so much of a stickler on, you know, this is proprietary. We keep things inside the bank or whatever, which is great. But it's also nice to see like, okay, this is the general model structure we're using. Is everybody else using this? Or maybe I'm doing it wrong, or how do you try to add in those different pieces? So I'm definitely excited to attend the one here in 4 days. And then I'll definitely attend that one in March as well, trying to get more information from all these different perspectives.
Heck yeah, you're more than welcome. And also something I was thinking about when you were just talking is, you know, it's easy. I think, you know, everyone I speak to who works in a big, you know, industry with a long history, for example, financial services, or, you know, another common one is healthcare and pharma. I mean, everyone always rags on their own industry and says, oh, we're so behind, like we're not doing anything. And then, it often is the case that, you'll learn actually, a lot of other people are being slow to implement this stuff too. I mean, something that I notice is, as you've alluded to, you have, the big tech industry who are, so far ahead of the game. Then you might have, a couple, really big enterprises who have, really robust ability to like develop AI algorithms that are custom and stuff like that. And then you honestly have pretty much everyone else who's in the learning phase. So, I would say everyone's a little hard on themselves. I personally think is my thought.
Yeah, I could see that. I'm always at my bank saying like, guys, we're 10 years behind everybody. These people are passing us. We got to get going on it.
It's life and death, is the feeling, of course, but it's a work in progress, of course.
Yeah, it's definitely a struggle. So I gotta ask you this on the presentations here. Who has been like your favorite presentation? Because obviously you guys have hosted so many different events in so many different industries.
Yeah. Wow. So let's see here. So I am one presenter I really like. So we actually have in each conference we'll have a general session, which is basically our version of keynotes. I was actually unfamiliar with that language when I began working with AI4, but so we'll have general session, and that's the part of any event where everyone is tuned in, anyone who's attending. There's no options, everyone goes. And we had a general session speaker at our August event, and she is going to return actually for this event in 4 days. Her name is Romy Hussein. Okay. And she works at Johns Hopkins Healthcare, and she gave a really dynamic presentation last time all about how they're using AI to basically understand, population health and trends when it comes to COVID-19. And that was the August one. And what she's going to actually talk again about during the general session this time around is some of her work consulting with enterprises about how to use machine learning for like a decision-making perspective during COVID. Which I think is so cool. And the reason I'm excited about it is because it's applicable across industry. Mm-hmm. She's, totally brilliant and really, really cool and likable. And that was just a really inspiring presentation because it's cool to see, this abstract technological concept that half people are like, what the heck even is that a lot of the time? Yeah. It really hits home, I think, when you're addressing this crisis. So that was a really cool talk. And that jumped out at me when you asked your question. Awesome. So she's speaking at the one coming up then, right? In 4 days? Yeah, in 4 days. Yeah. Okay. I'm excited to watch it then because COVID's hitting everything. I think it's great, right? She's in the medical industry and she's talking about the consulting of all these other firms. I think that's where we're at in the finance industry. Like we see it, we understand kind of what's going on, but we don't really understand what's going on and we don't know how that's going to impact all the movements here. Totally. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I'm not even, for sure. And I'm going to watch her talk too. I'm not an expert by any means on like what she's going to say, but it sounds like, their organization is basically, using AI to understand, these are the types of decisions that you can think about and prioritize, with the uncertainty surrounding this. I think it's going to be really cool. So yeah, thank you for expressing interest. I hope it's good. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So kind of to wrap this podcast up here, where do you see, let's do this as a two-part question. Where do you see AI4 in the next 5 years? And where do you see just AI as an industry in 5 years? Definitely. Yeah. So AI4 first. I think, the thing that, we were an events company focusing on AI not too long ago, and we've since transitioned to an organization that provides a whole host of services to the AI community. And the thing they all have in common is education and information and learning and development. And you can see that theme reflected in our focus now on real estate technology and that community of individuals. Mm-hmm. So if I had to put money on it, I'm not a gambler, but if I did, I would guess that basically we're going to keep providing new ways to communities that are centered around technology and knowledge, and basically we're going to keep doing events, and we have an AI newsletter now. We're going to keep inventing new communities of people who want to, learn about technology and equipping them with products and services that, can allow them to learn and grow, both in their networks and in their knowledge. So I suspect we'll launch other communities. I suspect we'll get better and better at the products and services we provide to the ones that we already have.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah. And then in terms of AI, I think you're just going to see a tremendous amount of growth, not necessarily, I mean, probably in the complexity and innovativeness of the models, but I think really just in the widespread nature of its use. I mean, you're finding there's so many vendors now, startup companies. I mean, these people who are experts in AI, they're all going, well, I should sell a product or service to big organizations. So I think you're going to see AI integrate into a lot of applications that people are using, and they probably won't even know it's AI. I think you'll see a lot more big organizations equip themselves with like a center of excellence where they can build their own in-house models and begin to do that. And I'm hoping that you'll see at the executive and management level, just a more accepting and approach to sort of new technologies and maybe a little less of the fear that we talked about earlier.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure, such an honor. Yeah, I'm very excited.